Well, hello everybody. Surprise, I'm not with you in person today as I am coming to you from our family ranch in Nebraska. Out here, surrounded by the wide open plains, the scent of rain drifting over the dry grass, and the skies that stretch as far as hope, I find the place where my soul exhales and remembers what it means to simply be. Rest matters. In fact, the practice of rest is woven into the fabric of Scripture itself, shaping us with a different kind of rhythm, one that invites us into cycles of Sabbath and even the bold, liberating promise of Jubilee. This is my happy place. It's the place where I would beg my parents to let me come back with my grandparents so I could enjoy being at the ranch for a long weekend. It's where I've come to recharge over the years, where I've learned to love the grounding simplicity of land and sky, and where someday I hope to retire. Adam is not excited about that. There's an uncomplicated beauty in this life, a pace that allows quiet to settle, solitude to feel like a gift, and gratitude to naturally arise. The ranch teaches me that rest isn't about escaping life's calling. It's about creating holy space to reflect, heal, and encounter God. Here, silence isn't lonely. It's not lonely at all. It's full of presence, inviting me deeper into the sacredness of being alive. Yet the gift of Sabbath, the invitation to rest, isn't limited to the plains of Nebraska. Whether in a bustling city or a quiet room at home, we are called to practice stepping away from busyness and the urge to earn our worth. The Sabbath reminds us our value is not measured in productivity, but discovered in our belovedness. Out of rest, we meet God's grace, restore our strength, and reclaim the courage to return to our work and relationships renewed. Wherever you are, on a ranch, a mountain, or a city bench, may you discover a happy place that opens you to rest, reflection, and the gentle nourishing of God's Spirit. This season, may we all make room to breathe deeply and remember who and whose we are. I've been thinking about this idea of rest, and one of the things that this scripture from Leviticus teaches me today is this question about who is really deserving of rest. Deep down, there's more than enough to go around, but so often our very human egos get in the way, nudging us to focus on ourselves instead of building real relationships. Without meaning to, we start treating others as a background to our own story, forgetting to recognize their humanity and their needs as basic and holy as rest. Consider those times when a late-night text or a noise of the neighbor's party disrupted your own rest, and how easily it can rile up frustration. Perhaps this week you're thinking about Minneapolis like I am. Our hearts broken by the pain that exists in this world and the choices that people make in harming others. Flip the script. How many times have my own or your own choices made it tough for someone else to have a moment of quiet or peace? What might be different if we made a habit of honoring each other's need for rest? Imagine if work, home, and church saw rest not as a privilege for the lucky or the strong, but as something we owe one another, a shared gift, a responsibility woven into our life together. Individualism tells us to guard our own time and energy, to think primarily of ourselves, but that's not the story God invites us into. God's vision is one where rest and care are shared blessings, where mutual support, Generosity and community are the foundation. God's intention was never that we look out for our own interest alone. It was always about forming a people who look out for each other. Something I'm reminded of when I come here and I see neighbors helping put up hay or neighbors bringing fresh cream to my grandparents who were in their 90s. This weekend we celebrate Labor Day. And here's the thing. Labor Day wasn't gifted to American workers out of a generous overflow of the nation's heart. No, it was born from the messy, beer-scented breath of thousands of exhausted people in factories and rail yards, but mostly just in the trenches of real, everyday grind, who were tired of working their lives away for the promise of someday and a boss's pat on the head. Picture this, September 5th, 1882 in New York City. The streets are full of sweaty, hopeful people who are marching, not just for a day off, but for dignity. Because 12-hour days and child labor and breathing God knows what in the air will make you brave, or just desperate, or both. There are speeches and picnics, because when people demand justice, they also bring potato salad. That's how communities form. And songs are sung, and some kind of hope becomes possibility. But like most things that really matter, nothing changed until it all went sideways. After the Pullman strike, a labor conflict that got bloody and ugly and exposed exactly how much power workers didn't have, suddenly Congress and President Cleveland discovered their conscience. Or at least their fears of more riots. And bam! Labor Day is a federal holiday. Sometimes good things come wrapped in the soot of disaster and the blisters of real people's hands. Now every September we fire up our grills and maybe, just maybe, remember that workers, not just owners, built this country brick by sweaty brick. Labor Day is more than a 3-day weekend. It's a sacred turned holiday, a story of how noisy, unruly, blessedly ordinary people grabbed a moment of justice and wouldn't let go. Today our scripture from Leviticus. As a queer man, I have lots of reservations about this text sometimes. When you think of Leviticus, though, if you think of it all, we might imagine a maze of ancient laws that are confusing, strict, or irrelevant. But this book, at its root, is about God's invitation to live differently. Not just to make life harder, but to set apart a people shaped by justice, mercy, and radical belonging. The laws weren't just prohibitions, they were practices meant to help the community mirror God's character and care for creation. To belong to God is to embody a way of life like no other, revealing what shalom, wholeness, peace, enoughness can look like in the world. In Leviticus 25, God's instructions begin not with the people, but with the land itself. The land, God's own creation, was to get its Sabbath rest every 7 years. During the sacred pause, there was to be no sowing or harvesting for profit. Whatever grew naturally was for everyone, landowners, workers, strangers, and even the animals. God's deep intent was that there would be enough for all, and abundance would be shared, not hoarded. The Sabbath year reminds us that creation's rhythm is grace, not ceaseless extraction, but holy rest, refreshment, and equity for every creature, human and non-human alike. The law then goes a step further with the Jubilee. Every so often in the years that come was a sweeping new beginning. Debts were forgiven, land returned to ancestral families, and those forced into servitude walked free. God commanded this restoration not as a one-time charity, but as a pattern, a holy do-over woven into the life of the people. Jubilee recalibrates the ecosystem, social, economic, and environmental, so no person or land is exploited forever. In our world today, we see how overplanting or unchecked consumption have led to systems that keep some communities from the gift of rest and dignity, whether through exploitive labor, racial inequity, or environmental degradation. Jubilee tells us that God's dream is a world where equity gets reset, balanced, restored, a vision of liberation far broader than any one person's freedom. But Jubilee also calls the people into kinship, a homecoming of sorts, not just to land, but to each other. As land and livelihood are restored, so are relationships. The year of Jubilee is not a solo journey, it's a communal journey. Wholeness is found in rebuilding the bonds of kin and neighbor and empowering one another's flourishing. It's a question for every church, neighborhood, and nation today. How can we, as a community, practice redistribution and prioritize rest for all? How might we structure our lives, policies, and resources so that everyone, especially the vulnerable, can truly come home and experience God's abundance? Leviticus 25 is not just an ancient blueprint, but a divine nudge. To be holy is to be set apart for love, justice, and restorative community. God's law is not a burden, but a gift, a way of life that invites us to live differently, to rest differently, and to hope differently. Living out God's rhythm calls us to trust in the sufficiency of God's provision and to become agents of Jubilee, restoring, sharing, and welcoming all into God's abundance. Rest isn't a suggestion for our well-being. It is a deep part of God's invitation to live differently, to be set apart as people shaped by grace, justice, and compassion. The witness of Scripture, from the Sabbath of creation to radical resets of Jubilee, remind us that rest is not earned or hoarded, but a gift meant for everyone, woven into the very rhythm of God's hope for the world. When we let these ancient words lead us, we glimpse a new way of living, not driven by self-interest, hurry, or scarcity, but by the abundance found in caring for one another and creation. May we find the courage to answer this call, living as people of rest, restoration, and holy belonging.